In this video, I'm going to talk about things you might want to think about or might want to know before starting ADHD coaching. So I'm going to run through what ADHD coaching is, who ADHD coaching is for, even though that seems fairly obvious, what to expect from the process, what ADHD coaching is not, and how sessions work, the common focus areas and things that you may work on during coaching, what makes ADHD coaching actually work, and what you're likely to get out of it, and really to help you to work out whether ADHD coaching is for you. I'm Max, and I'm an ADHD entrepreneurship coach. I've coached entrepreneurs, professionals, university students, but my focus is on people and their work, and that just comes from the fact that I have 30 years of my own entrepreneurship experience behind me. Let's start with, what is ADHD coaching? Well, ADHD coaching, as with all coaching, is not therapy. We're not doing therapy or counseling or mentoring. Although I have to say that I find that more than in other areas of coaching with ADHDers, I do tend to border up with some mentoring, because actually with ADHD, I find that we need it. And very often I'm helping people work with stuff they're trying to get done, trying to succeed at. It's often to do with a business or a job. And so whilst it's not therapy, therapy is really a deep psychological dive into one's past to understand the present and make the future better, whilst ADHD coaching is looking to improve your present and your future, it's a little bit about looking at the past just to identify what we have been struggling with, but we're not necessarily going to dive into why. The why is very often similar for many of us with ADHD. We have grown up with struggles, and probably more than the struggles, it's the reaction of people around us that kind of really has affected us, because it's very negative. There's a lot of negativity there. Whilst we're wonderful people and we're doing our very best and trying very hard, to the outsider, especially when we haven't been diagnosed with ADHD, and if we grew up in an era when ADHD was really not on the radar for anybody, it's much better now in many countries because, a kid can be identified as ADHD, diagnosed, potentially medicated, and through that and adjustments to the way we're being taught, for example, at school, we can thrive better. In the old days, I grew up in the 80s, and even though my ADHD would have been glaringly obvious today, it just wasn't then. And I was mistaken for disruptive, not concentrating, not paying attention, not trying hard enough. And all those comments that we receive build inside us a kind of a well of negativity. We are not diving into so much the why, but we're really interested in how we can today make adjustments to the way we think, behave, and act in order to, not for anybody else's particular pleasure, mainly for our own satisfaction, to get more satisfaction out of life and what we're doing. So ADHD coaching really focuses on taking action, and it's also about accountability. As you know, it's kind of easier to do something if somebody is looking over your shoulder in a way, because we are very distractible. We have a tendency to want to stand up and move and go and do something else. But when somebody's there and we've kind of agreed that we're going to do whatever it is, right, that's in front of us, we're more likely to do it. And that goes for when we go off on our own. If we've told somebody that we're going to be doing something, we want to please them. And so we will generally have a better shot at it because somebody else knows that's the plan. So yeah, we're focusing on taking action. We're making ourselves accountable through another person, being aware of what the plan is and holding us to it and encouraging us. And it's all about forward movement. It's about getting the next thing done, because we can't get all of that done unless we actually just do the next thing first. And that's what we struggle with, especially when it's something that we're not particularly enamored by the idea of doing. So who is ADHD coaching for? Anyone who has either been diagnosed a while ago but is struggling, anyone who's been recently diagnosed. There's a particular, especially in adulthood, when we're diagnosed, whether it's at 25 or 40, or I was diagnosed at 44. Before that, I really had ADHD wasn't on my radar. And getting a diagnosis later, as in not during childhood or school, the school years, has a very different effect often on people than it does to a child being told everything's okay, you're fine, we're just going to try this a bit differently. You know, that gentle touch when you're a child, if it's done right, can avoid stigma and shame and a lot of that negativity that, for people in my generation, poured out to us, totally understandably, by the people around us, whether it's teachers or parents or friends, siblings. We received a lot of negative comments, a lot of us. And so if you when you get diagnosed in adulthood, there is often a real kind of process to go through of accepting that all those years and that kind of hardship of being on the wrong end of negative comments was down to something that you had no control of. And very often we will feel like, why didn't somebody help me? Why didn't somebody spot this? Why was I made to feel less than the others? Why all this pain? I got all this pain because I wasn't spotted, because people weren't knowledgeable enough or aware enough to spot that I wasn't disruptive or naughty or bad in any way, but that simply I was struggling with an attention deficit and other aspects of ADHD. At school, it's a lot about attention and focus and concentration. And, you know, without being able to produce those things and behave in that neurotypical way of knuckling down and getting on with your work, we get a lot of comments. It's very badly interpreted and wrongly interpreted. So there is for an adult diagnosis, or a late diagnosis, as it's often called, there is anger, there is resentment, there is regret. And so when I found out I had ADHD, my overriding feeling was one of absolute relief. I felt so relieved finally that not to have an excuse for how I had been, but to have an explanation for how I am, how I had been. It was an explanation for what seemed to me to be contradictory messages coming out of me. You know, on the one hand, brilliant, especially with things that I was into. You know, I could exhibit extreme hyperfocus on certain things, but at school, you're not getting marked on how passionate you are about fixing motorcycles or building a model aircraft or whatever it is that I was, you know, those are a couple of things that I was really, really into. Now, if I got marked on my passion and dedication and attention that I paid for those things, I would have got top marks. But things like maths and history, I really struggled to demonstrate any form of concentration or focus because I wasn't focused on it. Daydreaming and therefore boredom and messing around and attention seeking, etc. So there is, with diagnosis, a kind of bridge to cross to get into a place of acceptance. And yes, maybe that falls slightly into therapeutic work, but yeah, it is about moving forwards and deciding to make one's life better from here on out. We can't change the past. We can change the present. And the future hasn't come yet. But so what we really need to work in is the now. So ADHD coaching is also really about creating systems which work for your brain, not against it. Because so many of the things that we're told either before a diagnosis or even after a diagnosis, because a lot of people talk a lot and don't really know what they're talking about. They're trying to be helpful, but it's really helpful, I think, to be coached by another ADHDer who has a lived experience of this, has had their own trials and tribulations over trying to fix it, probably a lot of failure along those lines in the pre-diagnosis years, and also during post-diagnosis years. Once we've been diagnosed and we read 5 books on ADHD or watch endless videos, we get lots of awareness and knowledge, but ADHD, as you probably know, is not about lack of knowledge. We know stuff. We know what to do. We also know how to do it, but it's the actual doing of it that's the struggle. So it's that third thing, the doing, that really is what we focus on in coaching, because that's generally what we struggle with. And obviously ADHD has all sorts of other symptoms that are very common around emotions, around communication, around thinking, how we think about ourselves and about different situations. And a lot of that comes down to self-esteem, or lack of it, which is very understandably diminished through a lot of those negative comments through childhood. Not only childhood, but teenage years, university. A lot of us ADHDers end up falling apart once the scaffolding of school, where teachers are shuffling us from one room to the next, go to science, go to sport, go to lunch. We can, if we're shuffled along and scaffolded, we can kind of fit in, just do the next thing. But once we move either to a job or to studying at university, there is nobody shuffling you around. You have got to come up with the goods of your own accord. And a lot of that is about managing time. So that's a big issue. And that's something that is one of the lowest common denominators for all ADHDers. So ADHD coaching is for adults, it's for students, it's for entrepreneurs and professionals with ADHD. There's obviously coaching for ADHD kids and teenagers. That's not really been my focus. I have 2 teenagers who have ADHD, and I have coached school-age children when I've been very specifically asked. But yeah, as I said, my area of expertise, if you like, is building businesses and making money and achieving goals as an adult with ADHD. So ADHD coaching is ideal for people who are struggling with time blindness. Time blindness being this just inability to perceive time in the same way that neurotypicals do. This can take different forms, but basically we imagine time as being this kind of elasticy kind of bubblegum, stretchy stuff that will fit to our needs or how we need it to be. It's not the case. And so this causes trouble for us when we're communicating and working with people who don't have time blindness, because they find us very frustrating because we don't have an eye on the clock. So struggles with emotional dysregulation, which is a very, very big part for all ADHDers, not necessarily constantly, but the dysregulation of our emotions are, a normal person will react to a said situation, let's say out to here, but ours goes further. And so our reactions can appear more extreme. That causes relationship difficulties, be that with teachers, parents, boyfriends, girlfriends, friends, siblings, anyone. A lot of us struggle to get going, to start a task, whatever it is. And a lot of us struggle with completing the tasks. For a lot of us, we are very keen to get going on stuff, but then the dopamine kind of falls off and the motivation falls through the floor, and we will really struggle to complete that task once the novelty of starting it has passed. So that's another big area that we work on and find ways to not only start but finish the tasks that we need to get done. ADHD coaching is also for people who have lots of knowledge. Many of us have read endless books, or if you're like me, read a third of each of these books because it gets boring and I want to move on to the next shiny book. But we've got lots of knowledge through reading, through watching videos, but we want to make it hasn't worked. Quite simply, it hasn't worked. And very often we need someone to bounce off, someone who has that knowledge, which you may already have, but you need somebody who also has it and has done this before. And we also need hope. And a big part of doing ADHD coaching is to gain hope that the future, whether it's this afternoon, tomorrow, next week, or the coming years, that the future can be better. And it's much easier to get hope, to experience that feeling of potential and change when you've got somebody to experience it with. Doing it alone is a bit two-dimensional, and we need it to be four-dimensional. We need it to be real, and we need to share. So now, what to expect from ADHD coaching, what to expect from the process. The first thing to know is that coaching is a collaborative endeavor. You are not here to be fixed. You are here to build strategies with your coach, which are going to help you make your life better. It is a process of trial and error. Not everything will work the first time. We try something, it doesn't work quite right. We try it slightly differently, and we refine the methods, the strategies as we move forwards. Trial and error, trial and error. Just remember that every error is a lesson. It's a new bit of information as to what doesn't work, because what we're doing is we're eking out, we're discovering what actually works for you, and we're all different. So there is a process of trying stuff that doesn't work quite right. Try it again this way. Oh, we hit the current suddenly, and bang, it's working. And doing that with somebody is much easier to maintain than doing this alone, which can feel really quite, word blockage in my head, which can feel really quite debilitating and depressing, because the failure experienced alone, we tend to ruminate on that failure, in inverted commas. It's not a failure, it's exploring. But it can feel like that to us. And we have lived a lot of what I call micro failures in our lives, whether that's turning up to the swimming lesson with no swimming costume. Oh, why? Of course you came to the swimming lesson without any swimming trunks. Why would you bring swimming trunks to the lesson? It's true. I turned up without the swimming trunks, and it's true that the teacher wasn't trying to be cruel. They were stating a fact. But we know, because we have this all the time, we know that it's a negative thing about us. And those negative comments, they build up. And because we know that they're true, they're not untrue. They're not true. We're building this negative picture. And so that's the self-esteem being knocked through repeatedly having these micro failure moments. So we're focusing on practical wins. We are looking at how to manage time by making it visible, using a calendar. We are looking at how to plan the tasks we need to get done. We're looking at how to communicate better. We're looking at our emotions and our emotional regulation or lack of. We want more stability emotionally, and that comes through understanding how and why we are affected by situations, and through gaining self-understanding, through gaining self-awareness, that it's not our fault that we have a tendency to overreact or be louder than other people or feel more distressed than other people, not be able to get over and get going again, not to be able to process the thing that just happened. It's having a greater effect on us than it is on the neurotypicals around us. Yeah, it is about practical wins, practical progress, actual real life improvements. With ADHD coaching, sessions are structured, but very flexible, because we are flexible people. We're not just flexible, we tend to be bendy. We go from one thing to another thing to another thing. That's because our attention is hopping like a grasshopper. Structure, but always flexible to dive into what's going on and what's pressing right now. What's important for you right now in this moment? It's probably going to be to do with something that happened since the last time we spoke. And so we look at it, we break it down, we understand it and ourselves. And a lot of it's about accepting that we're not wrong, that we are not at fault for this situation, but we do need a solution for it. So we look at it together and we work out what's the way to deal with a similar situation going forwards. ADHD coaching is not therapy, as I've said. We don't dig deep into past or childhood traumas, although that is a big issue of cause in terms of why we struggle. We're not just struggling with our difficulty in the moment, but we're also struggling with having been programmed to believe that we are a certain way. We're not good enough. We're not. So it's part of it, but it's not therapy. We're here to find solutions, practical solutions, very much I believe in. I do realize that there are coaches who do dive into a lot of deep past stuff. It's important to find the right coach for you. We all need something slightly different, but in my experience, and I do dive in with people when they need to, if they need to talk about it, we need to kind of like put a name to what a cause may have been or is for what's happening now, then yes, of course we talk about it. But it's not something that we dwell on, because what we're here for is to, yes, be heard and have our story understood and be understood in terms of why we are the way we are. But what people who come to coaching really want generally is to have a better life. And that's about new strategies. But we never neglect causes, but we tend to focus on how we can do better. ADHD coaching isn't about me teaching you. You're not being told what to do. And in fact, with ADHD, we tend not to like very much being told what to do. And if you're like me, if somebody tells me to do something and isn't really giving me choice, I will pretty much automatically push against that. So as an ADHD coach, I never tell people what to do unless they want to be told what to do. And in that moment, that's more along the mentoring lines. And I'm always happy to give advice from my own experience and experiences that I've had with other clients. But I'm not here to tell you what to do. I'm here and coaches are here to enable you to answer your own questions, because you have the answers to your questions. Some of the time it's just what the coach is doing is actually making sure that you are asking yourself the right questions by asking you questions. They're not telling you what to do, but they're asking a question that's maybe going to make you think through something that if you're like me, I was helped to think about things in different ways because I hadn't ever asked myself that particular question or in that particular way. Coaching isn't a one size fits all, and a good coach will be able to adapt to your variety of symptoms and programming and struggles. Any coach who says, this is what we're going to do, A, B, C, D, that to me is wrong. We are all different, and we need A, to be adapted to as individuals, and B, to be adapted to in regards to what is going on for us now, what's the immediate struggle. So sessions generally work on a weekly basis. It can be every 2 weeks. I think for a lot of ADHDers, that's too big a gap. And in fact, in my coaching one-to-one with clients, I often have a couple of sessions a week. Often, it's kind of at the head of the week and on the Monday, Tuesday, and then towards the end of the week, Thursday, Friday, it's kind of like topping and tailing the week, having a plan for the week. Off you go, and you do everything you can, and then we go over what happened, what went wrong, and how could we tweak this to be better. And coaching is a lot about encouragement. And I, as an ADHDer, know how difficult it can be sometimes to get the simplest of things done. In fact, sometimes the simplest of things, I will tell myself, yes, later. And then suddenly there's no time left. And that in itself is a struggle. Not that we don't know that we've got to do it. It's not that we don't know how to do it. It's just that we didn't get it done. I often think that, once a week or twice a week really works well. Each session, we tend to try and focus in on something particularly important for that moment. And it's generally something that has not just happened once, but it's happened repetitively. So, for example, we may work on routines. Routines can be very helpful for ADHDers. Once we get into a routine and it becomes like automatic, it happens by itself, but because we've repeated it many times, it's one of the best ways for us to remove the resistance from ourselves and to get the right stuff done, not the stuff that we want to do necessarily, ignoring all the things that we need to do. We break the problems down into manageable steps. We troubleshoot obstacles, and very importantly, we track the wins that we have, because tracking them, we can see by tracking them what helped them to happen. But by looking back, we can see, okay, we got this positive result. So this is what we did before. This is what we did to get there. Let's do it again. Let's build on it. You will often leave your session with 1, 2, or 3 small, doable action steps, things that you want to be repeating and using. A new tool. Think of it as a new tool that we've discussed in the session, discussed what it is, why it might work, how you're going to use it, when you're going to use it, when you're not going to use it, and you're going to go out and often experiment with that one tool or those few tools that you've gained during a session. And then the next session, we're going to look at how that worked out in the real world for you. And it's never perfect, but it's progress. Progress, not perfection, which leads me to the subject of perfectionism. It can be quite confusing because I'll take myself as an example. On certain things, I absolutely want to get it perfect. And on certain other things, I will just slapdash kind of get through it by the skin of my teeth, not really caring about the detail or how it is. And it's kind of generally in the neurotypical world, people are either very perfectionist or they're very slapdash. They're very kind of relaxed about the quality of their outputs, let's say, with tasks. We are totally capable of flipping between one and the other, backwards and forwards. And that's all about, how we are set up emotionally in that moment, what's going on, what happened just before, what are we thinking about that's happening after. Our brains are hopping around, and perfectionism can be very useful in the right moment. It can also be very destructive. I've coached a lot of ADHDers who, due to their desire to get something perfect, which by the way doesn't exist. There is no perfection. We don't get things perfect. Nobody, neurotypical or ADHD, neurodiverse. I remember being shown around, I think it was a mosque, I think in Turkey when I was a kid. And I remember this guide showing us these beautiful floors with mosaics made out of tiny little bits of colored pottery turned upside down, laid so intricate. And then he said, look, you see this piece here, it's all perfect, but there's this one piece that they have left in the wrong way around. Why do they do that? To spell out the fact that they acknowledge that perfection is only for the gods. We are not capable of perfection, so we shouldn't pretend even that it's a possibility. And that stayed with me. And it makes total sense to me. There is no perfect. There's good, there's less good. But perfection, when we get stuck in perfection, being terrified of not being perfect or getting something perfect, it can mean not starting. And that is very often at the center of reasons for people struggling to commence new tasks. I'm not going to get it right, so I don't want to go there, because at the end of that not getting it right, there's probably a negative comment, which is echoes from the past. Perfectionism is something that, not for every ADHD, but it can be a real issue. And there are ways to unlock that, unblock it. The first of which I do believe is the acknowledgement that nothing is perfect. It may be perfect in one person's eyes, not in the other person's eyes. So it's subjective, and perfection's not what we're striving for. What we are striving for is progress. Progress is very satisfying and way, way, way better for us and for the people around us than perfection. Perfection is unattainable. we're setting ourselves up for failure by even desiring perfection in the first place. So common areas that we focus on: time and energy management, not burning out, and how to recover when we are burning out. Creating sustainable routines, as I mentioned before, very helpful to get us into a routine. Routines are helpful because we build memory muscle, if you like, for getting stuff done. Procrastination. So how to manage procrastination and perfectionism. We've just discussed perfectionism. Procrastination is a huge difficulty for so many of us, and looking at what is behind the procrastination on the one hand, and also looking down the line from procrastination. What are the consequences or the benefits of completing a task or not completing a task? There is a payoff, or there is a cost revolving around the doing or not doing of a task. And believe it or not, it is possible to really self-motivate, and it's a trick. It's there are tricks to enable our mind to switch into a motivated state, and it's much simpler than you might think. Prioritizing. What do I do next? And if you're like me, you will want to go to the next. I always want to move to do the thing which is going to give me that rewarding feeling, that dopamine generated feeling of reward. Got to feel good. But in life or in work, and to succeed, we can't always do the next thing, the thing that looks the most appetizing to us. There are things that we just have to get done. Knowing what needs to be done. We know what we want to do, but it's about knowing what we need to get done. And we very often do know what we need to get done, but how to make that happen without shattering into a million pieces and just feeling shot at. And emotional spirals and shutdowns. Why do they happen? Why do they happen in you? Why do they happen in me? Understanding oneself, because we are all slightly different, but there are huge similarities, and that's what enables the coaching to be so effective, is that a lot of the patterns are very similar between us. And so understanding those patterns, understanding the reasons behind it, and gives us the ability to avoid emotional spirals or to recover quickly from them, and to avoid shutdowns, because shutdowns put us out of action. And it's really important to be able to say, I'm shut down, I can't do anything, but I'm going to take 3 steps forward. And that's what I look at with my clients, how to ease oneself out, but quickly. We also often work around communication and communicating one's needs clearly. Sometimes our communication is jumbled, and it may make sense to us, but it doesn't necessarily make sense to the people who we are trying to communicate with, so that they can help us. And that's relevant both at home, at work, in relationships, friendships, marriages. So communicating is a really important area that we work on for most ADHDers. It's not because you appear to be communicating clearly, in that you're eloquent and you're getting the words out that make sense, but often it's also about whether you're communicating the right bit of information or the most useful bit of information at a useful time, because not everybody can take in that information just at any random time. Everybody's different. And so it's about it's a shared thing, communication. So yes, we have a message that we need to get across, but we also, if we want it to get across, there are better and worse times to choose with each individual that you might be communicating with to do that. So what really makes coaching work is the willingness from the person being coached. It is a requirement in order to make coaching work. You've got to be willing to experiment. You've got to be willing to be open and to learn new ideas, new new ways that you may not have tried before. It's also about being very honest about what we are struggling with, what we have struggled with, without the honesty, the ability to just put that out on the table. And personally, I find that ADHDers are extremely open, and it's often said that we don't have a filter, we're unfiltered. Good, because that unfilteredness is actually a real benefit when we are trying to get help. You can't help, a doctor can't help a patient unless the patient tells him or her where the pain is. You can say to a doctor, I'm in pain, I'm in pain. And if you're not either pointing or explaining where you're in pain, what it's like, they have their hands tied. There's not a lot they can do without identifying what the struggle is. Another key thing that makes the coaching work is showing up. You've got to turn up to it. And we do have, a lot of us, struggles with time management and forgetting to turn up or missing stuff. If you don't show up, it's going to be difficult. You're not going to get the benefits. So that's key. But that kind of goes without saying. And mainly, I would say that it really helps in your coaching if you're curious. If you're curious about what you haven't experienced yet, what you haven't tried yet. Curiosity is really helpful because, well, the opposite of that would be someone who thinks they know it all. And clearly, if we knew it all, we wouldn't be sitting there looking for coaching. By the simple fact that we are searching for a coach, someone to coach us through into a better life through better behaviors and more effective methods, we are clearly not in the know fully. And there is no shame in that. We have very often been shamed a lot as kids and as adults for all sorts of reasons. And shame is not helpful. And shame is something that should never be present in a coaching session with a decent coach. This is a time to get to know oneself and get to love oneself and understand oneself and acknowledge that we want some different stuff in our life. And to get that different stuff, we've got to pick up some new tools. And coaching, I had ADHD coaching with a wonderful lady when I had just been diagnosed, age 44. That was about 5 or 6 years ago now. We're in 2025 at the time of recording, who really, really helped me to gain self-awareness. I had this wonderful explanation, not excuse, but explanation for the confusing nature of my life. Ups and downs, the contradicting elements of my life with great successes and terrible failures, not just in work, but in relationships and emotions and behaviors and communication. And somehow I didn't feel very good about my unpredictability, but I came through coaching to understand it, to accept it, and I have benefited hugely from that. And I continue to benefit actually every time I coach another ADHDer, because somehow we are learning together all the time. I wouldn't pretend for a second that I don't get a benefit out of sitting with another ADHDer talking about this stuff, because somehow it feels good to normalize. It feels good to be a part of a community, if you like, even if that community is just 2 people. Very often, my coachees, the people I coach, a lot of them have never really had an ADHD friend who they've been able to talk really openly about the struggles, the benefits. A lot of people kind of have people in their lives who they suspect, or even those people might say, oh, I'm ADHD. But having somebody who's very open and transparent and not being shameful about the whole ADHD thing is really helpful. And a lot of people have said to me, actually, I got so much from our session or from our sessions just through the sharing. And I, as a coach, when it's appropriate and useful, I share absolutely shamelessly my most terrible experiences with ADHD, as well as wonderful ones. But I share some of the most shameful situations that I've lived, and I guarantee some of them are really embarrassing. But I share them always because I know the power of enabling someone else who also has stuff that they really find excruciating to think back on, to know that other people do too, and life goes on. Not only does it go on, but through sharing, as we should say, sharing is caring, and there are healing mechanisms built in with a two-way sharing situation that I think are magical. Anyway, I hope this video has given you an idea of what to expect when you start ADHD coaching, and I look forward to carrying on with more ADHD information and thoughts again soon. Take care. Enjoy life.